Welcome, everyone. We are here with our friend Max Lugavere, who's a filmmaker, TV personality, health and science journalist, and brain food expert. I've actually gotten to look at his brain, which is fun. We did an episode for the Dr. Oz show together. He's the author of the international sensation, New York Times bestseller, Genius Foods: Become Smarter, Happier, and More Productive while Protecting Your Brain. He's also the host of the #1 iTunes health podcast, The Genius Life. He's contributed to Medscape, Vice, Fast Company, and The Daily Beast, and has been featured on NBC Nightly News, The Dr. Oz Show, and The Wall Street Journal. He also has a new book coming out March 17th called The Genius Life. And I always love interviewing Max.
Yeah, it's such an honor to have you.
Welcome to the Brain Warriors Way podcast.
Thank you. I really relished having the opportunity to get my brain scanned by you. It empirically was able to prove that I do indeed have a brain, which is something that I think for many years was, at least in my family, up for debate.
That's great.
So tell our audience your story. So why have you become so passionate about brain health?
Yeah, so I think that I have a story very similar to many people these days. I became interested in the role of diet and lifestyle in brain health when my mother got sick. And she was about 58 when she was diagnosed for the first time at the Cleveland Clinic with a neurodegenerative condition. And it took us a few years to actually get a diagnosis for her, even though she was prescribed drugs to treat both memory loss and her movement symptoms years before that. But she had a condition called Lewy body dementia, which was just traumatic to see a person, especially a younger person like my mom was, decline and succumb to that condition, which for anybody listening who doesn't know what Lewy body dementia is, it feels like having Parkinson's disease and Alzheimer's disease at the same time.
With psychosis added onto it. Oof. Yeah, because it often will start with visual hallucinations. And on SPECT, what we often see is their occipital lobes in their back are attacked, that we see low blood flow, different than Alzheimer's disease that tends to attack the parietal lobes nearby, top back part of your brain. But yeah, no, it can be just so devastating. It's what Robin Williams was diagnosed with. Yeah,
and Robin Williams, everybody knows he committed suicide. The condition does, it has more in common with Parkinson's disease than it does Alzheimer's disease. And the way that I, compare them all is that Alzheimer's disease primarily is a neurocognitive disorder. Parkinson's is a movement disorder. And in the later stages of Parkinson's disease, you might develop Parkinson's disease dementia, just because the condition ultimately ravages the brain, and we don't yet fully understand its etiology. But Lewy body dementia, at the onset, you'll experience both the movement symptoms and the cognitive symptoms. And that was something that my mom, from the get-go, it was very clear that my mom had. But nonetheless, what I experienced in every doctor's office with her, I've come to refer to as diagnose and adios. Yep. Typically, a physician would prescribe a new drug or raise levels of a medication that she was already on. And in my view, and I'm an N of one, this is an N of one anecdote, none of the medications helped my mom at all. And in fact, at the end of her life, she was on 7 different pharmaceutical drugs at least. So it motivated me in a very strong way to undertake this journey of trying to understand why this would have happened to my mom, what could be done, what might explain the extremely poor health that she had in the latter years of her life, and what could be done to prevent this from ever happening to me. And I think we're at this very fascinating and empowering time in the literature where we no longer have to sit idly on our hands. There's enough information out there. It's just a question of getting this information out to the right people. And one of the most shocking discoveries that I made when I began this research is that dementia often begins in the brain decades before the first symptom. And so this is a topic that I felt younger people I mean, ultimately people of all ages, but especially younger people need it to be talking about. And that's what inspired my work.
Yeah, no, it's one of the early lessons I learned from SPECT is that Alzheimer's and other forms of dementia, they don't start when you have symptoms. They actually start decades before, which is a huge advocate of screening the brain. It's like we screen every other organ, but the one that gives you your personality, the one that makes decisions, the one that decides if you're happy or sad, wealthy or poor,
good parents, a good spouse,
good parents, and so on. And, you know, if you don't look, you don't know.
Yeah, exactly. And, you know, that's the thing about the brain is that we look in the mirror and we can see our body composition. We can get a sense of our cardiovascular health, you know, when we're going up a flight of stairs, how in shape we are. But you can't look in the mirror and see your brain. So it's just something that most people don't think about. Most people are not thinking about their brain health, which is odd because so many people are struggling with mental health. And where do you think our mood manifests from? I mean, it comes from our brain. Where do you think, you know, memory originates in the body? Well, it comes from the brain. But the thing is, most people sort of underwrite the brain. Yeah.
Yeah, no, the end of mental illness coming out in just a few weeks. It's like, it's not mental illness, it's brain health issues that steal your mind. And, you know, we don't sort of screen and get young people excited about their brains. It's just a disaster waiting to happen. So Genius Foods did really well, and we're so proud of you for really elevating the conversation around food. Why did you decide to start there
it's a
first?
great title.
Yeah, well, thank you so much. I'm glad and I'm humbled, and it's been a wonderful experience. You know, because as I mentioned, it's all motivated by my mom, and that was my mission, was to get this information out there. And I started with nutrition because I guess you could say that I've always had an interest in nutrition for as long as I can remember. But food is something where I think people have just a tremendous amount of agency. We all eat every single day, multiple times a day, and so it's a great place to begin. You know, and there is now, for the first time, a plethora of studies coming out showing us that food has a major impact on the brain, which we should have assumed, I think, from the get-go, but we just didn't have the data there to really kind of have our recommendations rooted in science. But now, for the first time, we're seeing associations with dietary patterns that are related to reduced risk for conditions like Alzheimer's disease and all-cause dementia. We have a growing body of mechanistic studies in animals and in vitro showing us how different nutrients found in food can boost brain health and memory function and even mood. You know, if you'll accept that a mouse's mood might somehow reflect the mood of a human. And then we have, for the first time, interventional trials, like actual experimental research in humans. One that I cite in the book Genius Foods comes from the Karolinska Institute in Stockholm, Sweden, where I actually had the pleasure to go and visit. And I got to look at the work being done in the finger study, where they're showing it's the world's first ever large population, long-term randomized control trial. That's actually an ongoing trial where they continue to show us that by adhering to a healthier diet that's packed with nutrients that nurture the brain, that you can actually significantly delay the onset of cognitive decline. Whether or not we want to use the word prevention, I think, is up for debate, but I'm happy to use it because we use it for other conditions. But not only that, even in old age, by adhering to a diet that's rich in brain-boosting nutrients, extra virgin olive oil, fatty fish, dark leafy greens, nuts, seeds, things like that, you can actually have a marked effect on the way that your brain functions in the here and now. So what they're showing us in Finland, which is actually where the intervention is taking place, that even if you're in old age and have at least one risk factor for developing cognitive decline, you can boost the processing speed of your brain by 150% with food, or your brain's executive function, which is so crucial for getting things done in our day-to-day lives, by 83%. So I felt that we had enough information in terms of diet to make really solid recommendations for people that were safe, that were rooted in evidence, and that could have a significant impact on readers. And now that, the book has been out for over a year, Genius Foods, I can't tell you, Dr. Amen, the amount of testimonials that I've received from people, that they've been sleeping better, that the brain fog has lifted, their moods have improved. And so to me, I'm like, well, man, this is just like you are what you eat, and what you eat certainly matters for your gray matter. And so I'm just so happy that people are embracing this idea.
So when we come back, what I want to do is actually help people with really practical tips on how they can implement brain healthy food, genius foods, into their life. Tan and I tomorrow are doing a program for the Newport Beach Police Department. And the topic tomorrow is about food. We've been working with them for 6 months, and they're under chronic stress, and they have, they do shift work. So, they have these 12-hour shifts that are not going away. And, let's just see, what practical tips we can tell our Brain Warrior audience. Stay with us.
Welcome back. We are still with our friend Max Lugavere, and we're talking about genius foods. And your story is just so touching and so painful and it's so personal to so many of our patients. So I love the motivation behind this. I don't know if you know this, but that was my motivation as well. I was on 9 medications and sick. I had thyroid cancer that kept coming back and a laundry list of other things. And when the doctor told me I needed to see a psychiatrist, like it was my fault, I was done. And that's when I went on my journey, to research this. So I'm just resonating so clearly with what you're saying, and I love this.
And that is not how we met.
Not how we met. But we this idea of genius foods, it's just such a great title. And so I want to talk in this episode, if we could, about practical ways that people can, because that's really the big thing for our listeners. It's how do I make this practical? I don't have to. I know you hear the same thing. Don't have time. Don't have money. Those are the two big ones, right? I'm too busy. And my thought is if you're too busy not to do this. But how do you make it practical for them? What are your tips?
So that's such a good question. I mean, time is our most limited resource these days.
Yep.
And so what are the steps or the tactics that you can integrate into your life that are going to have the biggest wins? So one of the recommendations that I make in Genius Foods is to have a large fatty salad every single day. And this is for a number of reasons, and I'll get into those reasons specifically. But researchers out of Rush University, specifically Martha Claire Morris, who's on a team, she's the originator of the Mind diet, which is a Mediterranean style diet, very similar to the diet that I talk about in Genius Foods, is showing us that people who eat about 1.5 cups of dark leafy greens every day have brains that perform up to 11 years younger. So correlation isn't causation. You can pretty much assume that
greens. Small amount.
1.5 cups of greens. That's it.
That's it.
That's it. Yeah. People who adhere to that rule.
That is not hard to do.
I mean, they call it a big bowl. That's not even, for you and me,
I know.
We're eating that.
I have that in my smoothie in the morning. That's before lunch. So yeah.
Yeah. Well, seemingly that's all it takes. And I'll tell you why I think that's an interesting, amount of greens to try to ingest every day. Well, when you look around the produce section of the supermarket, fruits and vegetables are colored with compounds, called carotenoids. Some of the pigments that are used in produce are called carotenoids. There are anthocyanins and there are other pigments, but carotenoids specifically, I think, are crucially important to having an optimally performing brain. These include compounds called lutein and zeaxanthin. Another carotenoid that you might have heard of is beta carotene, which in the body becomes vitamin A. But lutein and zeaxanthin have been primarily considered for their value to eye health over the past couple of decades. About 6 milligrams of combined lutein and zeaxanthin every day can help ward off a condition called age-related macular degeneration. But it's now known that these compounds also accumulate in brain tissue, and they actually can help us have more efficient brains. And researchers out of University of Georgia, when using lutein and zeaxanthin supplementally, have shown that even in young and healthy college students, you can achieve a 20% boost in visual processing speed by consuming these carotenoids every single day. And where are these compounds found? They're found in produce. Anytime you see colorful veggies, dark leafy greens, they're rich in these two compounds. And kale, in particular, is the most abundant in them.
Interesting.
In about a cup of cooked kale, you get 24 milligrams of combined lutein and zeaxanthin. So if you take raw kale, for example, which is probably what you might use in a salad, about a cup and a third, you're getting about 24 grams or milligrams rather of these carotenoids, which have been shown not only to be associated with better brain health and better brain function as one ages, but can actually boost the processing speed of your brain.
So one important thing that people don't understand is that eye health, your eyes are the only part of your brain that is uncovered. So your eyes are really part of your brain. And so to have something that's good for your eyes, good for other parts of your brain, just completely makes sense.
So I like that because a green leafy salad with fatty, as you said, like either nuts or olive oil or salmon on it or something like that, you can either make it at home or you can buy it out. You can pretty much buy that almost anywhere. So that's not a hard thing to buy. So that's an easy tip. So just make that your lunch. Like I tell people, just get used to the idea. If you don't know what to eat for breakfast, eat a smoothie. Just for a week, make it a smoothie and add greens to it. And, so there's a specific thing you put in them. But we give them very specific things to do, it just makes it so much easier. So the salad I love. What else would you suggest?
Every single day I'm trying to eat a big bowl of dark leafy greens with, maybe I'm making it the entirety of my meal. Maybe I'm having it on the side. Right. But either way, I'm trying to get those greens, whether it's kale, spinach, arugula. They all have different benefits. But another important tip, as you mentioned, you definitely want to include fat because these valuable compounds are not absorbed without fat consumed concurrently. Right. So you want to douse that salad in extra virgin olive oil. That's the primary fat that I recommend. You definitely want to avoid commercial salad dressings, which usually use very brain unhealthy oils like canola oil, corn oil, soybean oil. You want to avoid those oils. And all you got to do is look at the ingredients list of your commercial, so if you're buying a pre-made salad dressing, you want to make sure that it doesn't have any of those oils in it. No canola, no corn, no soybean oil, no grapeseed oil, extra virgin olive oil, maybe avocado oil, close, runner up. Yep. Those are the primary oils that you want to use in that salad. And that helps, it creates like a slip and slide essentially, so that those brain valuable nutrients are going to be able to enter circulation and make their way up to your brain.
People think of the Mediterranean diet and pizza. So could you talk to us about gluten and dairy and your thoughts on them as they relate to the brain?
Absolutely. So gluten, there hasn't really been a very direct connection in the literature. Well, speaking openly, there hasn't really been a connection between gluten consumption and Alzheimer's disease or any form of dementia. But there is this idea that gluten in everybody stimulates unnecessary intestinal permeability. And this happens to a violent degree in people with celiac disease. But gluten is a protein that nobody can properly digest. Now, the dose makes the poison, I think, with something like gluten. No human can properly digest it, and yet it's become saturated in the modern food environment. We're consuming high amounts of gluten at every single meal, whether it's pasta, wheat-based pastas or sandwiches or wraps. Wraps are actually made using the addition of even more gluten, right? So that the wrap stays stretchy and it doesn't break. And then you have gluten added to sauces and gravies and soy sauce and things like that. So it's this protein that no person can properly digest, and we're just consuming more of it than ever before in human history. So I think that it's definitely worth avoiding, or at least minimizing your consumption of it if you're not overtly sensitive to gluten, and acknowledging that gluten can have effects in the body that are purely extra-intestinal, meaning that, you could be consuming gluten, you won't necessarily get bloating or diarrhea afterwards, but that it could be having an effect.
Right.
How this relates to Alzheimer's disease has not been elucidated in the literature, but just to hedge my bets, that's my opinion on gluten. And also, gluten is found in foods that are usually processed, and so I think it's worth avoiding for that reason as well. So I don't personally consume bread. I don't think pasta is a health food, even though they do consume pasta, in the Mediterranean, obviously. But I try to avoid those foods, and I try to build my diet around foods that are more nutrient dense. So grass-fed beef, fatty, cold water fish, nuts, seeds, dark leafy greens, cruciferous vegetables, eggs, things like that. And if I am traveling and I want to try some unbelievable bread, I'll do that, but it's definitely not a staple in my diet. And as far as dairy goes, most adults are lactose intolerant, but if you're not overtly sensitive to dairy, I do think that there are some worthwhile nutrients in dairy that I think, are interesting. We can talk about vitamin K2, which is found primarily in grass-fed dairy. It helps deposit calcium in your bones and teeth, really important for maintaining bone health. The dentist who pioneered looking at how nutrition affects dental health, Weston A. Price, was a huge fan of grass-fed dairy and things like that. I also think, Greek yogurt is a great source of protein. And in my new book, The Genius Life, I actually talk about the value of protein for achieving a healthier body composition. If you're going to consume dairy, the research suggests that full-fat dairy is the way to go. People who consume full-fat dairy, not low-fat or fat-free dairy, but full-fat dairy, seem to be protected against metabolic disorders and cardiovascular disease, things like that. And you also want to make sure that you're not, while yogurt can certainly be healthy, you want to make sure that you're not consuming yogurt with lots of added sugar, which is definitely not going to be good for the brain.
My concern about dairy is almost all of it is raised with antibiotics and hormones. And, whatever an animal is fed or given, you get the residue of that. I'm also concerned that both gluten turns into gluteomorphins in your stomach when mixed with stomach acid that works on the heroin centers of your brain. And dairy turns into caseomorphins, so when people take it out of their diet, they're beginning to go, well, when can I have it back? And that's sort of the reason, which is why I used to be addicted to my mother's pizza.
And I agree with you. The full fat, even like butter, if you're going to have grass-fed butter, I'd rather you do that than margarine and stuff like that. It's also got butyric acid, which is good for your gut, which I really like. But with milks and things like that, I think people need to be really careful because the pasteurization is a process that actually causes other problems when you're drinking it. And it's the same with homogenization. So they homogenize the milk, which actually can cause some health problems for people if you're drinking a lot of it. I always tell people if you're having a little bit and you're not intolerant to it, that's fine. It's when they're drinking, you see kids drinking massive amounts of it. They don't know if they're lactose intolerant, but they've got brain fog or they've got dark circles, and it's worth trying to limit it at least.
And if you have no problem, less to worry about. But I've found in my autistic kids, when I took them off dairy in particular, their ear infections went down because ear infections cause all sorts of problems because then they go on antibiotics and then they have general surgery to have the tubes put in their ears. But they talk more. That their language, the first time I learned this, which is almost 30 years ago, I took an autistic child off dairy and the next week they gained 50 words. And so, was that because they were sort of in this opiate fog and getting rid of that really helped?
Well,
I don't
certainly
know.
some people are more sensitive.
When we come back, we're going to talk more specifically about Max's new book, The Genius Life. Yes. Stay with us. Welcome back. We are here with Max Lugavere and having a great time, and we're grateful for his time to share his knowledge on the Brain Warriors Way podcast. Max is a filmmaker, a TV personality, a journalist, a brain food expert. His New York Times best-selling book, Genius Foods, has just done phenomenal and helped so many people. And, you know, Max, I have to tell you, our nutritionists at Daemon clinics have the best testimonials.
Yes, they do.
So it's generally not the medications we put you on. It's get your food right and your brain will follow. But you have a new book coming out March 17th called The Genius Life. And talk to us about how that's different from Genius Foods, and how do people have a genius life? Because who the heck wouldn't want that?
Right.
Yeah, it's such a good question. So I wrote The Genius Life to really be an all-in-one diet and lifestyle guide that's going to give you the best shot at averting not just Alzheimer's disease and dementia in accordance with the best available evidence, but other conditions like heart disease and even certain types of cancer. It's really a book about longevity and health span. You know, a lot of people today, they spend many, many, many years sick. You know, they don't live a long time, and whatever precious years we do have to our lives, much of it is dedicated to the management of chronic disease.
Mm-hmm.
I certainly saw that in my own life. And so this is a book about extending your lifespan and making sure that those years are spent healthy and virile and with vigor. And so I do make nutritional recommendations in the book that are a little bit different than the Genius Life. They're really calibrated more towards helping readers achieve the best possible body composition. So being, relatively lean and strong in body and mind. And so in the Genius Life, what I do is I placed an emphasis on certain macronutrients like protein, which, you know, I think a lot of people are confused about the value of protein. On the one hand, people are told that we're eating too much protein as it is. But on the other hand, how many people are struggling with sarcopenia as they get older and frailty? I mean, my mother was definitely one of those people. And so, and also, I mean, not to mention, you look at the obesity statistics. And I think that protein is a very, very powerful tool for people. And this is something that is kind of known in the fitness industry where it's a little bit sort of siloed off. But I like to expose the value of protein in the Genius Life. It's the most satiating macronutrient. So protein is going to kill your hunger better than anything else, carbs or fat. And while I don't advocate for a very high protein diet, it's actually very difficult to consume what one might consider a very high protein diet because protein is so satiating. So I talk about, in my book, I advise readers to prioritize protein, whether that is grass-fed beef or fatty fish or poultry, or if you're on a plant-based diet, plant-based foods that are high in protein, because it's gonna fill you up essentially. And then, there's this idea that people who underconsume protein actually consume more carbs and fat, and carbs and fat are essentially energy. Today. And people are inundated with energy. People are packing energy around their waistlines, on their thighs. And so protein, I think, is important for building, maintaining muscle, for losing weight. And also there is an association. People who consume higher amounts of protein, and this is an observational study that I cite in the book, but people who consume higher levels of protein in their diet actually have less amyloid beta in their brains and in their cerebrospinal fluid. Now, whether that's a function of the fact that they're consuming more protein or they're just consuming less potentially pro-inflammatory foods. Because if you look at all of the ultra-processed foods in the supermarket, they're all low-protein foods. They're all saturated in carbs and fat. I think it's a really powerful recommendation.
Although there's a movement on, putting the number of grams of protein on the packages, but I really want people to read the label, like over and over again. I say, about this study from the Mayo Clinic where they showed people who had basically a fat-based diet had 42% less risk of Alzheimer's disease. And they went on to say people had primarily a protein-based diet had 21% less risk of Alzheimer's disease. And those who consumed basically a carbohydrate base diet, bread, pasta, potatoes, rice, fruit juice, sugar, had a 400% increased risk of Alzheimer's disease. It's the food. And so having enough protein is, we have actually think of that as the body's reserve. We have a friend who was buff and really sort of took the Brain Warriors Way lifestyle seriously. And then he went to Hawaii and he was a little crazy and he jumped into a pool and ended up with leptospirosis, which is a bacterial infection that attacked his body and his brain.
Killed him within a week.
And he ended up in a coma. And I thought, when I left him at the hospital that night, I was getting a call in the middle of the night that he had died. But it was really only because of the muscle on his body, which was his protein reserve, that he ended up surviving and becoming, himself again.
So true. And as a nurse, I was a trauma nurse. And what I noticed is, and there are studies actually supporting this, what would kill the elderly people that would come into our unit versus the younger people, it was frailty. So frailty killed. It wasn't necessarily the broken hip or anything like that. It was they didn't have enough muscle reserve to survive through it, to actually be able to breathe and get up and do the things they needed to do. They didn't have enough muscle on their body. They had sarcopenia, like you talked about. And the same in reverse was the reason there were people that survived accidents you would not imagine. We never thought they would survive or should survive, but they did because of the reserve they had going in. And so if you were young and you were healthy and you had muscle on your body, you could sustain 3 months in an ICU, where you couldn't do that if you were frail going in. So,
yeah. And that's the biggest killer. What else in the Genius life?
So it's a lifestyle guide. So, I go deep into the value of getting good light in through your eyes every single day. Basically, at a 30,000 foot level, the book is about all the little things that you could do every single day in your lifestyle that are going to have big wins in terms of how you feel in the moment, but then also as far as your health down the road as well. And nutrition
so this is the practical
part of the story.
So this is the practical tips and how do I do this now?
So now that you said that, I just have to say this is brand new for us. We have a Bright Minds therapy lamp. Half an hour in the morning, and we have both white and blue light that has been shown to improve your circadian rhythm. So for our shift workers, but also seasonal affective disorder, head-to-head against Prozac was found to be more effective, helps with energy and so on. So,
and you're talking about light therapy as well, right, Max?
I'm talking about light therapy as well.
Yeah.
But this is a crucial point to bring up that, so what the latest research is suggesting is that it takes about a half an hour every morning of fairly bright light, about 1,000 lux of light, which is, if you just go outside, even on an overcast day, you're easily achieving that. The problem is 93% of our time today is spent indoors, where our house lights never are able to reach that level of intensity. But it takes about a half an hour to anchor your body's circadian clock, which is going to help you be more alert, more focused, and even happier throughout the day. And it's going to help your sleep at the other end of the day. But the caveat that I would add is that for these light sensing proteins in our eyes to be activated so that we can have a healthy circadian rhythm, we need to spend that time in the sun, and the amount of time that we need might actually increase as we get older. So as we age, there's a yellowing of the lens that tends to occur. And that can actually make us less sensitive to bright light.
Oh, so how interesting.
That's interesting.
So my mall walking days should be limited.
Well, so you only do that when it's raining, and I'm not supporting the mall walking thing unless it's raining. So
the mall walking thing.
Yeah, he's a mall walker. I never thought I was going to be married to a mall walker.
Whenever it rains, like I have to walk. If I don't walk, I'm not nearly as happy or energetic. And it's one of the things I do for exercise besides playing table tennis. But I love going to the beach in the morning. We live in Southern California, like you do. Oh. And that's why I like being outside. Though. Yeah, this winter has been really cold. And the people in New York are going, we do not feel sorry for you. 48 is not cold. Yeah. 48 below is cold.
I know. Yeah. It's crucially important, but light in the daytime is important for getting good sleep. It's important for feeling focused and energetic. But a lot of older adults, they claim that that complaint that I'm just not sleeping the way that I used to. Well, it might be a function of the fact that you're not getting enough light.
Yeah.
By the age of 45, a person has roughly half of the circadian anchoring light sensitivity as their 10-year-old self. So that's half. So whereas their 10-year-old self might only require 10 or 20 or 30 minutes in the sun to get that same potent circadian anchoring effect that the sun offers us, you might need double that time as an older adult. And if you look at hunter-gatherer communities or any of the world's blue zones where people are living for a long time and they're robust, they're outside all the time.
Yeah.
So that's not an issue. But for us, the fact that we're spending so much of our time indoors might be particularly deleterious for older adults. And so that's why I really look at all of the many things that you can do over the course of the day across the age spectrum to boost your health and light, getting good.
And is it light through your eyes or is it light through your skin? Because, especially in the winter, which is when this is going to air, is, people aren't taking off their shirt, and many people actually shouldn't take off their shirt.
You're going to get
so what would you recommend?
Yeah, well, light on your skin is crucially important too. And I do a deep dive into the value of getting sun on your skin in the book, primarily because it helps us create vitamin D, which is important for good brain health, reducing levels of inflammation, having healthy levels of blood pressure. So getting sun on your skin is important. In the winter months, obviously that becomes more difficult to do. And that's where eating foods that are rich in vitamin D come in. So egg yolks, fatty fish, and things like that. I mean, food is a non-trivial source of vitamin D to hold you over until those summer months when you can get back out into the sun. The problem is many people are not consuming foods that have vitamin D in it. So they're vitamin D deficient in the summer because they're told by their dermatologist to avoid the sun at all costs. And then in the winter, they're not eating vitamin D rich foods because they're told to avoid animal products. So they're not eating the egg yolks and they're not eating the fatty fish. And that's one of the reasons why I think so many of us are struggling with problems related to cardiovascular health, memory, to brain health and the like. It's just a systemic problem. But getting the sun on your skin when you're able to, super important. I mean, the UVB rays from the sun help us create vitamin D, which there was a very interesting, it was a small study, it needs to be replicated, but they found that for patients with Alzheimer's disease, actually that supplementation with just 800 international units of vitamin D every day was able to seemingly halt the progression of the condition.
And that
was an amazing finding that needs to be, I think, replicated with maybe a larger population, multi-center trial would be amazing.
That's a really small amount. I take 7,000.
So when we come back, we're going to talk about more of these really helpful suggestions in Max's new book, The Genius Life. Stay with us. Welcome back. We are here with Max Lugavere. We're having a great conversation about his new book, The Genius Life. And he's the best-selling author of Genius Foods. He's been on television a bunch. I have his brain, which always makes me happy. We did a show together for the Dr. Oz show. And we're talking about practical ways to keep your brain and your body healthy. And so we've talked about food.
Yeah, we talked
about light.
What about exercise? What about weight-bearing exercise?
Crucially important. I'm so glad you brought that up. I think that there's been a bias in the medical literature for a long time. All of the exercise interventions on brain health have really centered around aerobic exercise, which I think is certainly important, doing cardio, but I think it's been overemphasized in the literature, especially and also in the media. I think resistance training is crucially important. If that's the one exercise tip that I can give to you, it's resistance train.
Couldn't agree with you
stronger,
more.
build muscle.
Yeah.
Do
Especially
high
women.
intensity.
Women don't want to do it. And I'm like, you're not going to look like Ms. Olympia. Trust me, I've tried. It doesn't happen. Like if I want to look like that and I can't, you're just not built that way. Unless you are just a genetic freak, in which case, good for you. But it just doesn't, women avoid it at all costs. They don't want to have
So
to
what
be
are
big.
the health benefits of resistant training? When you say that, you basically mean lifting weights.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it means, having a better body composition.
Mm-hmm.
So, I mean, take a woman who is eating a lower protein diet because, women are told, and I think many people are told to
Plant-based.
avoid meat and protein and things like that. You take an older person who's eating a low protein diet and they're not weight training, but they're doing only cardio. That is that's the perfect recipe for muscle loss.
And inflammation.
And inflammation and fat gain. That's the perfect recipe. Consume a little bit more protein, which, it's very difficult to overconsume protein. It's not bad for your kidneys. That's been a myth that has been, debunked, thankfully, if you have healthy kidneys. And weight train. It's, having stronger muscles is associated with better brain health, better brain function, better insulin sensitivity, which is the inverse of type 2 diabetes, lower inflammation. You reduce inflammation with weight training. You're going to look better. You're going to
for
feel
women.
more confident.
Yeah, it reduces your risk of osteoporosis. I mean, you just need to do it.
The stronger you are as you age, the less likely you are to get Alzheimer's disease.
And not just
now,
that.
you're not saying cardio isn't important. There's this fascinating study that if you're 80 and you can walk 3 miles an hour, so I try to walk like I'm late. That's my big recommendation. You have a 90% chance you're living to 90. Right. But if you're 80 and you can only walk a mile per hour, odds are you don't have muscle and you're frail. You have a 90% chance you are not living until you're 90.
But you don't want to just do cardio. And that's what we usually tell people is like alternate it if you have to, like, because I like doing a little cardio. I like hiking. I like all that stuff. But some weight bearing exercise, especially if you've got, like me, which so many women now do, thyroid problems, you are at much higher risk for bone wasting, muscle wasting. It's osteoporosis. So weight bearing exercise becomes crucial.
And we're not recommending people start heavy because then they get hurt.
Or get help
and when
doing
the
it.
older you are, the longer the recovery time when you're hurt. So what are the resistant training exercises you recommend, Max?
Yeah, well, thankfully, whether or not you have access to a gym or you can do push-ups in your home or even air squats, you can, anything that's going to function as a compound exercise. So it's going to work multiple joints and muscle groups at the same time. Yep. So take a squat, for example. Squats work your quadriceps, your hamstrings, your glutes. It's really important to have strong glutes, which are meant to be the strongest muscle in the body. But because we're so sedentary these days, it actually is we atrophy it and we lift with our lower backs, causing, back pain for so many of us.
Yeah.
Trying to work your way up to a pull-up. I know some people are going to be like, oh my God, a pull-up. How am I going to be able to do that? Well, by joining a gym, you have assisted pull-up machines that can help you get stronger. People don't appreciate, but there was a study that took elderly sedentary people who were not resistance trained at all, and they put them on, I believe it was a 6-week program. They saw, it might've been a 6-week or a 6-month program. Don't quote me on this, but they saw a dramatic improvement in their strength, up to a 50% improvement in their strength. Crucially important.
At Tufts University, they did a study and they got the elderly folks in nursing homes lifting just light weights to start. I mean, really lightweight, but for them it was big because they had never lifted, and their independence increased dramatically. So that's just, it's a matter of independence. And you made a really good point about squats. Well, again, the nurse in me is coming out, but what people don't think about, if you can't do a squat, we see so many people fall and hit their heads getting off the toilet when they're older, or trying to squat down to pick up something, and they lose their balance because they're not strong enough and they'll fall and hit their head. Just so critical. It's just so crucial.
It's crucially important. I mean, again, you go to the world's blue zones or hunter-gatherer communities, you see elders squatting on the floor. They're not sitting on chairs. And I'm not saying that we all need to start sitting on our floors, but being able to get up off of a floor, you're right, is a fairly good predictor of longevity. Now, when it comes to these kinds of, these exercises, I think it's really smart to pick a lighter weight at first so that you build a little bit of stability. You start to understand like what the movement is so that you don't injure yourself. And not just to do like bicep curls. Sometimes I'll go to the gym and I'll see, older adults, they're putting in their best efforts, but all they're doing are those isolation movements. You really want to focus on the exercises that are going to give you the most bang for your buck. So bench presses, or pull downs, or squats, lunges, things like that. Those are going to be the best. Start with a lightweight, but then don't be afraid to increase it, because, exercising at a level of intensity that's about 80% of your max, that's really what it takes to stimulate that muscle growth, So if all you're doing is going to the gym and, throwing up these light weights, you really want to be able to increase the weight. So if you're doing 15 to 20 repetitions, I think that's when it's time to up the weight. And actually, there was a study that came out very recently in the journal Neuroimage that found for the first time that resistance training, about 90 minutes a week, was actually able to grow the hippocampus, which this is the first time that this was ever shown with resistance training. They've shown this in the past with aerobic exercise, but by resistance training, you're not just growing bigger muscles, you're growing a bigger memory center in your brain.
I love that. So we only have 2 minutes left. What are some other of the major messages in your new book, Genius Life?
Exercise is crucially important. Exercise is medicine. But then one of the other modalities that I talk about, one of the other physical activities that I talk about is actually called non-exercise physical activity. The value of just staying active and doing things other than sitting on the couch watching TV. So being sedentary for an extended period of time literally drains blood from your brain. Whereas even simple daily, basic spontaneous movements like chasing your cat around the house,
house
or
cleaning,
doing your laundry, or doing dishes pushes fresh blood and nutrients up to your brain.
Doing the dishes, that
I know, I love
so
it. He
much.
does the dishes. It's so great.
Yeah, it's good for the brain. It's good for the brain. Any movement is good for the brain at the end of the day. And the inverse of that, an overly sedentary lifestyle is a toxin to the brain. So I recommend people being active as much as they can, not just standing in one place, or sitting in one place, but being active, whether that means walking regularly, or doing chores around your house. And also, if you have a loved one that has dementia or some other kind of condition, this is pretty important. It's allowing them to continue to do the things that they love. I think we like to bear the burden for our loved ones, especially when they're in advanced age or they have a health condition. But it's crucial to continue to maybe assist them, but to let them do the things that get them up out of bed or off the couch. It's vital. I mean, the human body is designed to move, and stagnation is death.
Yeah, we just had this discussion in our house this morning because it's also a mood stabilizer. Let's just be honest. We're just talking about this morning. I'm not a nice person when I don't exercise. If I get too busy to move my body and I'm just sitting at a computer, because I just finished writing a book, and you can appreciate this. You got a deadline. And when I sit and write, I'm just not a balanced person. I wish I was, but I'll sit for 16 hours and then I'll get up and just go, and I don't like that, but it's just how I function best when I'm writing. And so I'm just grumpy. I don't feel good. And it's like, we constantly have this discussion. He's like, go work out, because you're just not fun to be around. It changes your outlook on life. So I don't understand people.
Well, we are at the end of our time, and I'm so grateful that you reminded her to do that, because it makes
you don't have to remind me. I'm not. Yeah, it makes
me happy. We're just so grateful for you, Max, and your mission in the world. I mean, we're really sorry what happened to your mom, but what we find for our brain warriors is basically taking your pain to purpose.
Love that you did this.
And that's what you're doing. And I just can't imagine a better thing for you to do with that hurt. And it is just helping so many people. So we are grateful for your friendship, and look forward to this book being a monster success for you.
Thank you, Dr. Amen. Yeah, it's a pleasure. I can't wait to get you on my podcast. And thank you for helping me spread the word about the Genius Life. I think it's, I poured my heart and soul into it, and I hope it resonates with people.
Well,
Wonderful.
I think it will. All right, my friend, take care.
Thank you, Doc.
If you're enjoying the Brain Warriors Way podcast, please don't forget to subscribe so you'll always know when there's a new episode. And while you're at it, feel free to give us a review or 5-star rating, as that helps others find the podcast.
If you're considering coming to Daemon clinics or trying some of the brain healthy supplements from Brainmd, you can use the code podcast10 to get a 10% discount on a full evaluation at AmenClinics.com or a 10% discount on all supplements at BrainMDHealth.com. For more information, give us a call at 855-978-1363.